Isolde accepts the bargain and touches a grave rose petal. It burns her hand, and the gardener's true nature is revealed, a hollowed husk stitched with vines, bound to the master of the unburied. The burning. The moon hung blood-red above the overgrown rose garden, and Isolde's breath came shallow as she approached the fountain. The stone was slick with something mossy, a residue that had weathered seasons. Her black cloak dragged through tangles of thorns. The gardener emerged from between the roses like smoke coalescing into form. He stood with the careful posture of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. His long coat was so dark it seemed to absorb the moonlight, and when he moved toward her, his fingers trailing over the nearest thorns, she noticed they didn't quite bend right. The joints articulated wrong, as if he were remembering how to be human rather than doing it naturally. "You've come," he said. His voice was thin, papery. "To accept." Isolde lifted her chin. She'd walked into worse rooms than this. She'd read books bound in things she didn't ask about. She'd learned to bargain with entities that wore scholars' robes and spoke in careful syntax because it was easier than admitting what they were. "The knowledge," she said, "the true name, the way to break the curse." "All of it." The gardener smiled, and his teeth looked too white against his pallid face. "For a small price." He plucked a single petal from the nearest grave rose. It was black as dried blood, and it hung from his fingers like an accusation. The petal seemed to absorb the red moonlight, to drink it down and darken further. "Your blood," he said, "to bind you to Nachtmar, to bind you to him." Isolde's fingers itched for the knife at her hip, but she'd come here to learn, not to run. She'd come here because 100 girls had disappeared into this place, and she meant to understand why. She reached out. The petal was warm. It shouldn't have been warm. Nothing about the grave roses was warm. They were cold things, death things, but it burned against her palm like a coal pulled fresh from a brazier. Isolde gasped and tried to pull her hand back, but the gardener's fingers, those wrong-jointed fingers, closed around her wrist. "What have I done?" The words escaped her before she could stop them. "This mark burns as if branded by hellfire itself." She clutched her hand to her chest. The petal had disintegrated against her skin, but the burn remained, spreading like ink in water. The pain was white-hot, and then, suddenly, cold, a cold that seemed to originate from somewhere deeper than flesh, that crept up her arm like fingers made of winter. The gardener's mouth opened wider, too wide. Vines split the skin at his wrists, rupturing the papery surface of his hands. They writhed in the moonlight, green and obscene, and beneath the coat Isolde could see the outline of more vines, more growth, a body that was no longer a body at all, but a scaffold of vegetation wearing the shape of a man. "I am what the Lord makes of those who love too fiercely," the gardener whispered. "I tend these roses because she is in them, every root, every thorn." Behind him, the shadows deepened. The air itself seemed to crack like old glass. The unburied one stepped forward from the darkness between the roses, and Isolde's breath caught. He was tall, too tall, his proportions wrong in a way that made her eyes slide off him and then forced themselves back. His clothes hung in tatters from a frame that might have been aristocratic once, centuries ago. Embroidery that had rotted to lace still clung to his shoulders. His eyes were polished onyx, and they fixed on her with the weight of centuries. "The bargain is struck," he said, and his voice was the sound of earth settling over a coffin. "Your soul is forfeit, but your service shall be rewarded with power beyond reckoning." Isolde twisted against the gardener's grip. His vine fingers were stronger than they looked, winding around her wrist with a gardener's patient cruelty. The cold burn in her hand was spreading now, reaching toward her elbow, and with it came a strange sensation, not quite pain, not quite numbness, a hollowing out. "There must be another way," she said, and her voice was steady even as her hand shook. "I will not serve the forces of darkness." "Her touch has awakened me from my slumber," the gardener said to the Lord, his eyes glazed with something that shimmered with ecstasy or mirrored the vacant gaze of a puppet. "The time of the unburied grows near." The unburied one approached. His footsteps made no sound on the broken glass and vines that covered the ground. When he reached out, his fingers were ice, actual ice, frost crystallizing in the air around them, and he brushed them across her cheek with the tenderness of a lover. "Deny me and suffer the consequences," he whispered. "Your fate is sealed within these cursed grounds." Isolde tried to wrench her hand free, but the gardener's grip only tightened. The vines in him pulsed, their rhythm echoing through her own veins, carrying the cold like sap in winter. With a clarity that cut through the pain, she understood. This was the cost. This was what the grave roses demanded. Not just knowledge, not just service. Transformación. You're not alive," she whispered, staring at the gardener's ruined face. He tilted his head as if considering the question seriously. "No," he agreed. "I'm not, but I am useful, and soon so will you be." The cold reached her shoulder. The burn in her hand had stopped hurting. That was the worst part, she realized. The pain had simply ceased, replaced by a numbness that felt like forgetting, like something essential being slowly, carefully removed. His smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, too numerous, a grin that felt less like human expression and more like the unveiling of a predator's jaws. "Welcome home, bride," he said.